I was the norm is to be white, what color they are. They sometimes go on and add, talking about different races is so divisive. It creates racism. If we would just stop talking about whites and that up. But it's actually harmful not to bring it up and not to talk about it and not to express it. Layla Said says this about this. She says, and herein lies the falsehoods of the promise of racial color blindness. The promise of the church of color blindness, she says, is that if we stop seeing race, then racism goes away. That racism will go away, not through awakening consciousness of privilege and racial harm, not through systemic or institutional change, not through addressing imbalances in power, not through making amends for historical and current day harm, but instead by simply acting as if the social construct of race has no actual consequence. But white supremacy works. It doesn't go away because we refuse to see it. It's important for us to be aware of what we are seeing and what it means. And in our teaching, we know that, we acknowledge that in every other area of experience, that if your body is sick, we acknowledge that, right? That's how we know that we're sick, so that we can do something to become well. If we're, if our finances are in shambles, we acknowledge that and we say, okay, so we can start then, as I mentioned last week, go from the unknowing, right? And then unlearn what got us to this place. I know in my own experience of learning about relationships and about money and about health is that I had to kind of know how I got to this place. What was it that was creating for me? What beliefs and things, ideas was creating for me at that time? And so it's the same way with race. So the fact is, of course, that we are all one, and we are more alike than we are not when it comes to race. There's a really great little website on PBS of another so-called race. It's just not true. We're more alike than anything. So unlike many animals that have subspecies, we have the felines and then the subspecies of tigers and the subspecies of lions and domestic cats, even though Robert would say his Monty is more like a lion than a domestic cat. We don't have subspecies as humans. We don't have subspecies. We're just one species. So this is one of the little facts that's on this website, PBS website. What is race? More traits, athletic ability. Those are different genetic makeups, and they say that one small amount of total human genetic variation, 85% exists within any local population, be that Italian or Kurds or Koreans or Cherokees. They say that 2 random Koreans are likely to be as genetically different to being white. And this affects everyone, whether we are aware of it or not. So it was interesting to me to learn this, that slavery's been around for a long, long time. People have been enslaving people for a long time. However, it wasn't based on race. The origin of the word slave comes from the word Slav, which is prisoners from the Slavonic tribes of Europe that were captured by Germans and sold to Arabs during the Middle Ages, like 1300s. And throughout much of human history, societies enslaved others due to conquest, due to war, due to debt, but not because of physical characteristics or natural inferiority. And this is all these facts are all on this PBS site. So in America, a unique set of historical circumstances led to the enslavement of people who shared similar physical, white people made that up to justify enslavement. So colorblindness won't end racism. Pretending that race does not exist is not the same thing as creating equality. And there's 3 different reasons why colorblindness, or trying to be colorblindness, there's lots of reasons, but I'm going to highlight 3 reasons about why colorblindness can be so harmful. And these 3 comes from Layla Said's book, Me and White Supremacy. So she says that in the first, it's an act of minimization and erasure. She says, when you say, I don't see color to Black, Indigenous, or person of color, you're saying who you are doesn't matter. And I don't see who you are for who you are. I'm choosing to minimize and erase the impact of your skin color, your hair pattern, your accent, your language, your cultural practice, your spiritual traditions as a person of color, a Black or Indigenous person, existing within white supremacy. So the Supreme Court Justice Harry Blackmun famously said, to overcome racism, one must first take race into account. So in the teaching of Science of Mind, we lift each person up as an individualized expression of the one divine source. We celebrate and acknowledge that uniqueness. So can you imagine looking out at a beautiful garden that has flowers with all kinds of different colors and textures and heights, and not being able to see those variations? Common background contains what the ancients called the microcosm. We have every reason to suppose that there is, back and with and around every individual, the divine representation of themselves as the children of God, forever expanding. This is a powerful concept, that because there is so much individualization, and we know that we're all one, we must know that each individual expression is a powerful microcosm of that one, and it's expressing in its own unique way. That's the power of our teaching, to know that about each individual expression of life. How can we not honor that individual expression, how it shows up in that beauty? Layla Said says the second instance is that colorblindness is an act of gaslighting. You're familiar with that term, gaslighting. It means that it came from an old movie where the man was trying to make his wife insane, and he kept turning down the gas lights. The lights were run by gas at that time, and so he would turn the light down, and then she would say, you know, the light's getting dimmer, and he would say, no, it's not. No, it's not. And he would make her think that she was going crazy. I mean, that's the literal definition of gaslighting, is telling people what they're actually seeing and believing isn't true, and making it seem like you're, you know, that something's wrong with you. And so Layla Said says it is cruel. It's a cruel way of making Black, Indigenous, people of color believe that they're just imagining they are being treated the way they are being treated because of the color of their skin, just thus keeping them in a position of this destabilization, right? So if we can acknowledge that, if we can say, yep, that is true, that is happening, then it's that moment that we can heal it, we can move forward, we can begin this path forward. Ernest Holmes taught us that we never deny a condition in our life. We don't deny that racism exists. We go from that unknowing, that unlearning, to that learning and to that action. And we use these tools that we have that teach us how do we change our thinking, our deep unconscious bias, our self-talk, our self-beliefs that create new mental equivalents, new ways of seeing the world, in our seeing everything in our world. And that's how we create. That's how we create anew, by creating that new energy. And lastly, Layla Said says that color blindness is a way to avoid not only looking at other people's race, but looking at your own. And when she says that, she's talking to white people, because this book is written from her perspective to white people. She said, so often white people see themselves as raceless, as normal, with everyone else being a race or being other, that they fail to investigate how the idea of colorblindness protects them from having to reflect on what it means to be white in a white supremacist society. When you refuse to look at color, you refuse to look at yourself as a person with white privilege. So white people have this way of something called white centering, this making the experience of the white person the norm. And I do that. I know I do that because I grew up in a white-centered environment. And most of the time, I'm surrounded by the majority of people who look like me and benefit from the comforts and the accommodations of being white. And so part of my experience is realizing when I do that, when I experience that. And I had an interesting experience this last week where I'm taking a class called Black and New Thought. And it's a class taught by Dr. Darnice Martin. She's a professor of theology, and she's also part of the Johnny Coleman Theological Seminary, which is a New Thought seminary. And New Thought, if you're not familiar, is kind of our umbrella name, our denomination per se of that our teaching science of mind is part of. And so I went to this meeting on Thursday night, and it was on Zoom, of course, and out of about 70 people in the room, there was probably 3 or 4 white people. And Dr. Martin was speaking to this group as if it was all of the Black people in the room, and the experience of Black people in New Thought, and she was speaking like I would speak to, my group, as though, and it was so off. It threw me off so that I actually thought maybe I shouldn't be here. Am I not supposed to be here? Is this just as a white person, am I not supposed to be here? And of course that wasn't true at all, but it made me have this really visceral experience of what it might be like to be the only Black person in a room of white people, and having to completely always translate it back to my experience. Oh, and she's talking about Black experience and not the white experience. So what is the white experience? And I was so grateful for that experience. I was so grateful that I am where I am to be able to go, oh, this is I can't ever know what it really feels like, but I can have a little inkling. And I love that. I love being able to have that experience, to feel that discomfort and feel that disorientation, and have that realization of that this was what it's like to walk through a white world. And so this is this process, right, of celebrating this colorful palette of life, to be able to acknowledge, for me as a white person, how I have walked through this world and how it's benefited me to even say, I don't see color. It only benefits me in a not good way, because in the long run, it doesn't benefit any of us. That in order to really step into this action and inclusion is to honor and to celebrate and to acknowledge our uniqueness as children of God in our oneness as divine beings. And this week is such a beautiful week for us to be celebrating and acknowledging this, because we had such a beautiful demonstration of celebrating color in this historical pick of the Democratic vice president candidate. And regardless of your party or your preference or anything personal at all, everyone should be moved by this, by the awareness of the significance of a Black woman, an Asian American, on the national stage, and how just seeing her in that position, in that place of power and authority and wisdom, and to be able to see her in that helps us expand once again. And if we didn't acknowledge that, I heard I was listening to a podcast where they were saying that they're like, oh, well, all the people in the media said that Joe Biden picked a safe choice. He picked the safe choice. And they only said that because it was the expected choice, but it wasn't the safe choice. It was not the safe choice. And it was a unique and powerful statement of the diversity, the beautiful diversity in our country and beyond. And so I celebrate that the colorful palette of our lives, and I know that as we go forward, it just benefits all of us to have a perspective of a colorful world as opposed to a colorblind world. And just a quick fact, just before we go into our meditation or into our prayer time, is that we see less than 1% of the electromagnetic spectrum. So all the beautiful colors and the diversity that we see actually represents less than 1% of that spectrum. It's a very tiny little bit of the actual diversity and color in the world. And it's my hope that as we continue to evolve and grow, we will expand and see more of that palette and more of that spectrum as we go forward. So let's celebrate that and go into our prayer. I'll look here and see if we have some prayer requests to incorporate into that. So let's just close our eyes for a moment as we celebrate this truth of this colorful spectrum of life itself, to know and recognize that divine presence, that all that there is this one, all there is this expression of the divine. I know that I call forth this understanding of the divine presence, and I call forth those qualities that I choose to experience and to express, of love and peace and joy and health and wholeness and expansion and equity and justice. And I know that as I claim those truths for myself, that I can easily and joyfully claim those truths for each person within the sound of my voice, whether you're in our Zoom room, you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, or you're hearing this recording later. I just know that each of us is such a powerful expression of that one life, that one power, that one presence. And I know that family and friends